Welcome to Ready for Horror Night. I'm Lizzie Bishop, your guide through the shadows, where every story I tell is stitched together from whispers, memories, and things most people would rather forget. Here, you don't just listen. You step inside the darkness with me. Tonight I want to take you back to 2016, a year that left behind more than just headlines. Do you remember the sudden wave of clown sightings that swept across America? Adults brushed it off as a prank, a passing trend. But for children sitting in quiet classrooms, staring out of windows where they should have only seen the playground, it was something far more terrifying. This is not just a story about a clown costume. It's about the moment when laughter dies in your throat, when the smile staring back at you is too wide, too still, too wrong. So settle in, turn down the lights, and lean closer. Because what started as a joke became one classroom's living nightmare. It was a quiet afternoon at Brookhaven Elementary, the kind of calm that usually drifts in when the last hours of the school day are slipping away. Inside room 12, 20 restless fifth graders bent over their desks, pencils scratching against paper, while the clock ticked slowly toward dismissal. Among them was a girl named Hannah, sharp-eyed and a little dramatic, the type who never missed a chance to point something out. She suddenly gasped, her voice high and cutting through the silence. "There's a clown outside." At first, a few of the children laughed. Of course Hannah would say something like that. But when heads turned toward the wide classroom windows, the laughter thinned. Standing just a few feet from the glass was a figure in a sagging red and yellow clown suit, the fabric stained and rumpled, as if it hadn't been washed in years. His face was caked with white paint, his eyes black and hollow, and stretched across his cheeks was a painted grin that didn't seem to belong to anything human. And then he raised his hand, slowly, deliberately, waving at the children as though he had been waiting for them all along. At the front of the room, Mrs. Callahan, their teacher, stiffened. She crossed the floor to the window, stared at the clown for one long second, and said sharply through the glass, "Excuse me. Classes are in session. You need to leave." The clown didn't move, didn't speak. He just kept smiling and waving. For a moment, the classroom felt suspended in silence. Then came the whispers. Caleb, the class clown in more ways than one, chuckled nervously and said, "It's just some guy trying to be funny." A few students snickered, eager to believe it was nothing. But not everyone laughed. Maya, sitting near the back, pulled her chair closer to her desk and whispered, "He's not moving. He's just staring at us." Her words carried a weight that made several others sink lower in their seats. Mrs. Callahan's expression tightened. She picked up the old corded phone mounted by the door and dialed the front office, her voice low, urgent, as she stepped halfway into the hall. Inside the room, the children pressed closer to the windows despite their fear, unable to look away. The clown remained exactly where he was, frozen in that grotesque pose, head tilted slightly to the side, hand lifting and lowering in an unnerving rhythm. The painted grin seemed to stretch wider the longer they looked at it, as though the mask itself was breathing with them. When Mrs. Callahan returned, her lips were pressed thin. Without a word, she crossed the room and yanked the blinds down, shutting the clown from view. The metallic clatter of the blinds rolling shut echoed louder than it should have, making several children flinch. But even without seeing him, everyone knew he was still there, still smiling, still waiting. The room had barely settled when the loudspeaker crackled overhead. A man's voice, firm but hurried, filled every corner of Brookhaven Elementary. "Staff, initiate lockdown procedures immediately. This is not a drill. Every child froze. The whispers stopped mid-breath. The shift in the air was so sudden it felt like the temperature had dropped. Mrs. Callahan snapped into motion. "Everyone, away from the windows, lights off, move now." Her voice was sharp, no longer the gentle tone they were used to. The fluorescent bulbs overhead flicked out, plunging the classroom into an uneasy half-darkness. The only light came from the thin sliver under the door and the faint glow of the blinds that hid what still lingered outside. "Get down," Mrs. Callahan ordered. Desks screeched as students scrambled to the floor. Ethan and Naomi, sitting nearest the door, helped drag a heavy bookshelf closer, wedging it against the knob. The scrape of wood against linoleum was deafening in the tense silence. Huddled together in the farthest corner, children clutched their backpacks like shields. Some trembled, others pressed their hands over their mouths to stifle whimpers. Jonah, usually the loudest in class, had tears streaking silently down his cheeks. Mrs. Callahan crouched low with them, her silhouette barely visible in the gloom. She raised a finger to her lips. Absolute silence. Outside, somewhere beyond the blinds, came the faint sound of gravel shifting, as if someone was still there, waiting. The minutes dragged like hours. In the stifling dark of room 12, every creak of the building seemed magnified, every shuffle of a sneaker against the floor like thunder. No one dared to breathe too loudly. Lila, curled up between two desks, pressed her hands so tightly against her ears they turned pale. Beside her, Marcus stared at the thin strip of light beneath the classroom door, as though expecting a shadow to pass at any second. Then, a sound, soft, deliberate, the faint crunch of footsteps on gravel outside the window. They moved slowly, circling, as if whoever or whatever was out there knew they were being watched in return. A muffled whimper broke the silence. Sophie, usually so quiet in class, began to shake uncontrollably. Mrs. Callahan reached out in the darkness, squeezing the girl's hand with a steady grip. Her own pulse raced, but her eyes never left the covered window. And then, a pause. Silence so heavy it pressed down on every chest in the room. From somewhere outside, a sound floated in. 3 faint taps, not on the door, not on the glass, but close. A slow, deliberate rhythm, like knuckles against wood, reminding them that the clown hadn't gone anywhere at all. Every child froze, their faces pale in the dim light. And in that stillness, the truth sank in. This wasn't just a prank. Whoever stood out there was waiting. For what? None of them wanted to know. The tapping stopped as suddenly as it had begun. For a long, endless stretch, the classroom was swallowed by silence, so absolute that even the sound of breathing seemed too loud. Then, at last, the loudspeaker crackled again. The principal's voice, steady but strained, echoed through the halls. "Attention, staff and students. The lockdown has been lifted. The situation is under control. You may resume normal activity." Relief washed over the room in a collective exhale. Tessa buried her face into her knees, tears spilling freely, while Adrian whispered, "It's over, right? We're safe now." But no one answered. Mrs. Callahan stood slowly, her silhouette tense in the dim light. She unlocked the door with careful hands, though her eyes betrayed her doubt. She didn't speak, only guided the students back to their desks, urging them to sit as if nothing had happened. The blinds remained drawn tight, the air still heavy with the weight of what they had seen. A few students exchanged uneasy glances, waiting for someone to say it aloud, that the clown had never moved, never left, that his presence was still stamped into their memory like a scar. The school day limped forward, lessons resuming in a strange, mechanical way. But beneath the hum of pencils and the shuffle of books, one thought pressed against every young mind in room 12. If the clown was really gone, why did it still feel like he was watching? The final bell rang, but instead of the usual burst of laughter and chatter, students left the building in uneasy silence. Backpacks hung heavy on their shoulders, and every glance toward the tree line carried the same unspoken question. Was he really gone? Two friends, Oliver and Jade, walked side by side down the cracked sidewalk that led toward their neighborhood. They tried to talk about homework, about video games, anything normal, but their voices never rose above a whisper. Then came the sound of hurried footsteps behind them. A pair of younger girls, Emma and Claire, sprinted past, their faces pale. Emma's voice cracked as she shouted over her shoulder, "Someone's in the woods!" Oliver and Jade froze. Slowly they turned their heads toward the cluster of trees that bordered the back of the school. The woods weren't deep, just a thin barrier between the playground and the road beyond. But they were dark enough to hide someone who wanted to be hidden, and there he was. Half concealed by the branches, the clown stood perfectly still. His costume, dirt-stained and sagging, seemed even darker in the fading light. His face, painted in that grotesque mask of cheer, glowed pale between the shadows. He raised one hand again, that same slow, deliberate wave. But this time his eyes, dark, unblinking, weren't on the classroom. They were fixed directly on Emma and Claire, beckoning them closer. Jade gasped, tugging at Oliver's sleeve. Neither of them said a word. They didn't wait to see what would happen next. Together they turned and ran, the echo of their footsteps chasing them all the way home. Behind them, hidden in the trees, the clown's wave never stopped, and so the school day ended. But the fear did not. Emma, Claire, Oliver, Jade, each carried the same memory home with them. Not just the image of a clown at the window, but the knowledge that he had returned, that he had stood waiting in the trees, patient as a shadow, his painted grin carved into their minds. Police combed the area that evening but found nothing. No footprints, no costume discarded in the brush, as though the figure had melted into the twilight, leaving behind only terror and unanswered questions. Was it a prankster who wanted to scare children? Or something far darker, someone who wanted more than just a laugh? No one could ever say for sure. What we do know is this. In 2016, across countless towns, these clowns appeared and disappeared, leaving families shaken and children afraid of what might be lurking outside their windows. And for the kids of Brookhaven Elementary, that day never faded into rumor. It became a story they would whisper for years to come. Here on Ready for Horror Night, we don't chase answers. We chase the shadows left behind. So I'll leave you with this question. If you glanced outside right now and saw a figure waiting in the dark, waving slowly just for you, would you wave back? And that was the day the clown appeared and vanished just as quickly, leaving only questions behind. Was it just a prank, or something much darker waiting in the shadows? We may never know, but here on Ready for Horror Night, we keep the stories alive, because the night is never as quiet as it seems. If this story kept you on edge, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and tap the notification bell so you never miss another journey into the dark with me, Lizzie Bishop. Until next time, keep your doors locked and your lights low.